The fertility regulator has given approval for a team of scientists in London to genetically modify human embryos. The procedure, known as gene editing, will be carried out on embryos donated after IVF treatment. Opponents say such methods pave the way for the creation of designer babies. But Sarah Norcross from the charity the Progress Education Trust says the research is important.
What it's particularly looking at are the very, very early stages of development. And so it's hoped that some of the questions that the researchers are asking about what happens in those early stages will help us understand why so many embryos fail to implant in IVF treatment, for example, and why people have miscarriages and lead to a better understanding of miscarriage.
Now, London scientists have been given the go-ahead by the fertility regulator to genetically modify human embryos. The first time gene editing, as it's known, research has been officially approved anywhere in the whole world. Now, the work aims to provide a deeper understanding of how embryos develop, and the programme director in bioethics at St Mary's University is a chap called Dr Trevor Stammers. He said people would have a number of, quite legitimate, in his opinion, concerns.
It's not just a religious objection. There are many, many people across the world who think that Britain is being very, very hasty in entering into this arena, and it's only been attempted so far in China, and all of the embryos died. And I think we need much, much more debate about the greater ethical issues related to this.
Well, here with a view on that is Sarah Norcross, Director of Progress Educational Trust, a think tank based in King's Cross, which campaigns for genetic research. Good morning, Sarah. Good morning, Sarah.
It was interesting to hear Trevor there and talking about, the embryos in China where the research was done and they didn't survive. This isn't the point of this research. This research that's been licensed in the UK yesterday is not for embryos to develop into babies. It's for basic scientific research into the very earliest stages of development in human life, with the hope that we will better understand those stages, that learning can then be used for further research and hopefully one day help to improve the success rates of fertility treatment, IVF, and also to help prevent miscarriage and to better understand why some women have multiple miscarriages.
And I did say this is the first time such gene editing research will be officially approved anywhere in the world, so we're not really comparing like with like when we heard about China, are we?
We're not comparing like with like, and perhaps one of the reasons, and we should be proud really, that we are one of the first to do this, it's because we have a proper law in the UK that governs this area of embryo research. We have a long history of doing embryo research responsibly in the UK. And we have a specific regulatory body, the Human Fertilisation and Embryology Authority, which oversees all that, which grants the licences, which inspects the clinic, which follows up. And if the researchers overstep the line in relation to the law in the UK, they face not just fines, but also it carries a criminal sanction.
But we also have the fear that people have, albeit based on ignorance, of some kind of Frankenstein monster developments, of some kind of tampering with the basics of human DNA, of human genetics, which will unleash who knows what in the future. How legitimate are any of those concerns, would you say, Sarah?
They're understandable if you know nothing about the area, but scientists are very highly regulated, and they have to get ethics. They have to get ethics approval, not just from the regulator, but from their local ethics board. They have to get approval usually because they have to raise the money to do their research. So the funding body that will be paying for this will want to be satisfied that it's all going to be done properly. And we're a long way off from wanting to, create little Frankensteins. You've got to think about, when you think about it rationally, what do scientists want to do? What do researchers want to do? They want to help people to overcome diseases, to overcome these impediments to having children. The rest is really fanciful and science fiction. It's not what motivates scientists.
By the same token, though, in the past developments, for example, during the First World War in cosmetic surgery, in improving people who've been mutilated in conflict, have grown into a huge cosmetic surgery industry. So where science starts isn't always where it ends up.
No, but the cosmetic surgery industry is one that doesn't have the same regulation as fertility treatment. In fact, it's something that fertility doctors have argued about, that they're the ones who always get the flack in the media, when actually some of the cosmetic surgeons could do with being more tightly regulated in the UK.
Thank you for your time this morning. Sarah Norcross there, ending our programme, the Director of Progress Educational Trust, a think tank based, as I was saying, in King's Cross in London.
Scientists in Britain, interesting, are going to be allowed to genetically modify human embryos. First time it's been officially approved anywhere in the world. Still be illegal, though, for them to implant the embryos in a woman. The licence has been given for researchers to look into early miscarriages, for example. Sarah Norcross is the director at the Progress Educational Trust, which works to improve choice for people affected by infertility and genetic conditions. Let's get a quick word. Sarah, hello to you.
Good afternoon.
How do you feel about the decision today?
I think it's a great step forward. Britain's always led the way in the areas of genetic research, and we pioneered IVF in this country. And this is another sort of first in that the UK is going to start, doing basic scientific research, looking at the very early stages of human development.
So, how's it going to help? What sort of conditions could theoretically be either eradicated or a problem solved by using genetically modified human embryos?
So what this research is, it's not doing those things. Okay, what the licence for is today, because I'm anxious that we don't get ahead of ourselves here. So what this researcher is going to be looking at is answering those questions about, how early cells develop in embryos, and then, try and use that knowledge to understand why people perhaps suffer miscarriages and why so many embryos in fertility treatment fail to implant.
So it's important work that's going to be carried out, but it's still, it says, will be illegal for them to implant the embryos in a woman.
That's right. So our law is very clear on that. Yeah. Researchers can, do their experiments on these early stage embryos up to 14 days or until something called a primitive streak develops, whichever is sooner. And that is a very strict rule that we've had for many years in the UK.
Sarah Norcross, Director at the Progress Educational Trust. Sarah, thanks for being with us.
Well, Sarah Norcross joins us now from the charity the Progress Educational Trust, which works to improve choice for people affected by infertility and genetic conditions. Good afternoon, Sarah.
Good afternoon, Paul.
Is this overall good news, or do you echo any of the concerns we heard about there from our health reporter?
No, this is really good news, because this shows how regulation and the law in the UK work really well in this area. So, scientists have had to apply for a licence, which has been carefully considered by the regulator, and they've got the permission to do that work from the regulator, but they also have to go through another test. They have to have then local ethics approval from their local research council as well. So this is, very carefully controlled in the UK.
Now, as we know, it's impossible for human beings to unlearn scientific advancement, and the fear's always been that this would lead, for the best of reasons, to the terrible outcome of genetic eugenics, people being modified simply for appearance, or people being modified, for example, for something as mundane as hair colour or even skin colour. What can be done? What safeguards are in place to prevent that happening?
Well, you have to think that we have sort of safeguards around that already in the UK. So where we allow people to have reproductive choices in these areas, so to prevent a heritable genetic condition by selecting a healthy embryo. There are restrictions as to what genetic conditions those, satisfy those criteria. So, for example, if you said you didn't want to have a child with red hair, that wouldn't be granted by the regulator. And so, those things are well established in the UK, and it's important to remember that in the UK you can't even select the sex of your child, which you can in other countries, unless it's to prevent a serious genetic condition.
Now, we did hear a lot last year when this was first mooted and discussed about the theoretical possibility of, for example, 3-parent babies. That isn't this yet, though, is it?
No, this is something that is quite separate from that. That was that was techniques. 3-person IVF was to prevent inherited mitochondrial diseases, and that was using the mitochondria from a donor egg in that process. This is looking at the genes in the embryo created by the parents and using technologies that are a bit like, if you think about, using word processing software, so cutting bits out, pasting bits in to try and see and better understand how these genes work, because there's now a technology that scientists are very excited about because it's very efficient, it's much quicker and much more accurate than what they've been able to use before.
By the same token, though, the choice of words is very important for human beings, and you've made a comparison with a microprocessor. I've talked about genetic editing. What we're actually talking about here is, and I'm not using this in a pejorative way, tampering, altering human life. Now, are we responsible enough as a species to do that?
I think we are very responsible in this area, and we make decisions all the time, sort of informal, social decisions that we don't think of are decisions about having when we're having children, about our partner, about what we eat, about the time in life that we perhaps have those children, so they're less likely to have a chromosomal abnormality. So there are lots of factors that we already do anyway. But this, as I say, is a very carefully regulated area, and there are criminal sanctions in place in our law if people don't do what is required under that regulation.
Sarah, we appreciate your time this afternoon. Sarah Norcross there from the charity The Progress Educational Trust, speaking to BBC Radio Berkshire.
Sarah Norcross from the charity The Progress Educational Trust, which works to improve choice for people infected by infertility and genetic conditions. So this would be good news for you, I take it, Sarah?
Yeah, this is great news, Adrian. But I want to sort of temper it with. This is a first step. This is basic research that we're talking about today. This is a license to continue an ongoing project using new technologies. This CRISPR is called genome editing thing. And it's a bit like if you're thinking about, you're editing, you suddenly got, software on your computer that allows you to easily edit documents, combined with a sort of a really sophisticated finding tool that helps you to find this tiny bit of code, this genetic code, and adapt it to see what impact it has. So it's very exciting technology. We're really, really at early stages with it. And just to sort of pick up on something in your report just now, the law didn't change in relation to this technology in October. The changes that came in October were completely connected to three-person IVF and mitochondrial donation. It wasn't about making this sort of change to the genes that we're talking about today. That has been lawful in the UK for a long time now.
Okay, thanks very much, Sarah Norcross from the Progress Educational Trust.
Sarah Norcross ist die Leiterin des Progress Education Trust, der die Entwicklung der künstlichen Befruchtung unterstützt. Sie weist die Bedenken zurück.
Eltern wollen gesunde Babys. Sie suchen nicht nach dem perfekten Baby. Sie wollen, dass sich ein Kind zu einem gesunden Erwachsenen entwickelt.
Sarah Norcross joins us first, though, Director of the Progress Educational Trust, a genetic and reproductive ethics think tank. Hello, Sarah.
Good afternoon.
I imagine you have some very deep discussions around your think tank table.
Yes, we do have a lot of discussions about this, and I think that you came up with a very good point in your introduction there, where people who are absolutely certain about where this is going, and and have got all the answers already, you need to consider them, again, because today, we're just on the very first steps with this of the granting of a license to allow basic science into looking at the very early stages of human development, and understanding perhaps as a result of that work why people suffer miscarriage or why embryos in IVF treatment fail to implant and develop.
Now, I said earlier, in some ways, this ought to be a proud day for this country, where we're leading the world in this field of scientific research, but a lot of people are uncomfortable about it. How can you reassure them?
I think we should be proud because, we've got a long history in this country of leading in these technologies in relation to genetics and discovering the double helix. We had the first IVF baby born in this country. We've done a lot of work, and we have very solid laws in this country. We've had a law in place since 1990, so to set out how the embryo can't be experimented on, how it can be developed, what changes can be made to it, and what can be done in research, and then what can be done in clinical application. And those two things are very different.
So I don't think you were listening to the interview I did with Josephine a few moments ago. I mean, she just thinks that embryos should not be experimented on, and in that case, it is a fairly dogmatic position, and there are arguments for that. I do understand them. But if we are to make progress in trying to eliminate genetic defects, then some sort of experimentation has to happen, doesn't it?
Yes, and these embryos are being donated by couples who have gone through IVF treatment, who have surplus embryos left as a result of that treatment, and who have really generously, thought about, what to do with those embryos and decided to donate them for research so that it might help someone in the future who's got fertility problems, or so that, some benefit may come from it.
Because, in a sense, I would describe myself as probably quite pro-life. I suppose everyone would describe themselves as pro-life in some ways, but in this context, it has
describe themselves as pro-death usually.
No, it has a specific meaning here, doesn't it? And I am uncomfortable in interfering with nature, but if we had taken that approach from the start of scientific experimentation, we wouldn't have got any cure or many cures for the diseases that we now can cure, and we certainly wouldn't have made steps forward in actually protecting embryos anyway, would we, if we hadn't done some sort of experimentation?
Absolutely, and I think it's it's really small steps here to understand. If we don't ever do the basic research to find out what the possibilities are, then we're just we're banning something before it's even started. Before we even understand it, just through fear. And really, we should explore what the possibilities are in this research before making the next step.
Just finally, someone texted me earlier and said, well, what happens if we get to a point where a parent can say to a scientist, I don't want the embryo to have a gay gene, or I do want the embryo to have a gay gene, come to that matter?
Well, what we have to think is here, in the UK, we're very lucky to be in this regulatory environment where that would not be allowed. The things that we're allowed to do at the moment in relation to selecting an embryo that's got something or another is in relation to serious diseases. Okay, we can't even select in the UK for sex, so you can't go to the doctor and say, I want a boy or a girl. You can only do that if it's a genetic condition that only goes to one sex. So, we should be confident that we have a rigorous framework.
No, absolutely, but I think the fear is that maybe somebody could go to a clinic in a different country that doesn't have our rigorous regulation and order essentially a designer baby.
We can't stop that from happening, unfortunately. Other countries do things differently, and we're lucky that we have the system that we have.
OK, Sarah, thank you very much. That's Sarah Norcross, Director of the Progress Educational Trust.